A British soldier struck him across the face with a sword, and instead of backing down, this uneducated wagon driver knocked the man out cold. For that single act of defiance, the British Army sentenced him to 500 lashes, a punishment designed to kill him slowly in front of his own men. He counted every single strike out loud alongside the drummer keeping time, refusing to pass out, refusing to break, refusing to give his enemies the satisfaction of watching him fall. When it was finally over, he claimed the drummer had lost count and that he had only received 499. 25 years later, that same man would stand on a cattle farm in South Carolina and destroy the most feared fighting force in the entire British Army in under 60 minutes.
His name was Daniel Morgan, and nothing about his early life suggested he was destined for greatness. Born around 1736 in New Jersey, he walked out on his family as a teenager after a violent argument with his father, taking nothing with him but the clothes on his back. He drifted south with no plan and no money, sleeping outdoors, taking whatever work he could find, until he landed on the rough edge of the Virginia frontier near Winchester. This was not polished plantation country. This was raw, dangerous land, where survival depended on strength, grit, and a willingness to fight. Morgan fit right into that world because he was built for it, standing well over 6 feet tall with the kind of temper that could empty a tavern in seconds.
He could not read. He could not write. He drank hard, gambled harder, and got into so many brawls that people started calling him the bully of the frontier. But underneath that reputation was a sharp instinct for survival that would later define him as a soldier. He worked as a wagon driver, hauling supplies across dangerous mountain routes, earning the nickname the Old Wagoner, a name his troops would still be using decades afterward. When war broke out between Britain and France over control of the American frontier, Morgan volunteered to haul supplies for a British military campaign. And what he witnessed there changed the course of his entire life.
The British marched their soldiers into the wilderness in tight, rigid formations built for European battlefields, completely unprepared for forest warfare. French and Native American fighters ambushed them from behind trees, and the British were slaughtered while trying to form neat lines in the middle of chaos. Morgan survived, but the lesson stuck with him permanently, that rigid discipline meant nothing against speed, cover, and accuracy. Not long after, his violent clash with a British officer led to that brutal whipping that should have ended his life. Instead, it hardened something inside him, a stubborn refusal to ever be broken again by anyone.
When the American Revolution began, Morgan was almost 40 years old, but Congress handed him command of a company of expert frontier riflemen. These were hunters and marksmen who could hit targets at distances a standard British musket could never reach, and Morgan marched them 600 miles in just 3 weeks to join the fight. His men picked off British officers with terrifying precision, and his reputation only grew during the brutal campaign against Quebec, where he fought through a blizzard and was eventually captured. The British offered him a commission if he switched sides, and he refused without hesitation, choosing 7 months as a prisoner of war instead of betraying his cause.
At the Battle of Saratoga, Morgan's sharpshooters became the deciding factor in one of the most important victories of the entire war, targeting British commanders until their army collapsed into confusion and surrendered. Yet despite everything he had done, Congress passed him over for promotion in favor of men with better political connections. Bitter and insulted, Morgan walked away from the army entirely. But when the war shifted south and the Americans suffered catastrophic defeats, losing entire armies and watching their generals flee the battlefield, Congress had no choice but to call him back, finally promoting him to brigadier general.
Morgan was sent to face Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton, a ruthless British officer known as Bloody Ban, infamous for slaughtering American soldiers even after they surrendered. Rather than run from Tarleton's cavalry, Morgan chose to fight on a stretch of open pasture land called cow pens, with a river blocking any retreat behind him. Every military rule said this was a terrible position, but Morgan chose it deliberately because he understood something deeper than tactics. He understood people. He knew his militia would panic and run the moment British bayonets charged. So instead of fighting that weakness, he built his entire strategy around it.
The night before the battle, Morgan walked through camp, sat by the fires with his men, and told them the truth instead of empty promises of glory. All he asked from his militia was 2 solid shots before they were allowed to retreat, and that honesty made them trust him completely. When Tarleton's exhausted men attacked at dawn, they were met with disciplined gunfire, followed by what looked like a full American retreat. Confident they had won, the British broke formation and charged forward in disorganized chaos, walking directly into the trap Morgan had spent all night preparing in his mind.
At the exact right moment, Morgan's hidden lines turned and unleashed a devastating volley, while cavalry and reformed militia swept in from both flanks, surrounding the British completely. It was a double envelopment, the same brutal tactic Hannibal had used against Rome over 2,000 years earlier, and it worked with the same devastating result. In less than an hour, Tarleton's army was destroyed, with over 100 dead and hundreds more captured, while Morgan's forces suffered only a fraction of those losses. The illiterate wagon driver, who had once been whipped nearly to death by the British army, had just delivered them one of the most humiliating defeats of the entire war, and set in motion the chain of events that would end with their final surrender at Yorktown.